Welcome to this section of the course where we'll discuss critical thinking and avoiding bias. I've borrowed from the works of numerous experts in the field. Two of the most notable are Mr. Morgan Jones and his book, The Thinker's Toolkit. Mr. Jones is a veteran analyst at the Central Intelligence Agency. A significant portion of this lesson is also taken from David T. Moore's paper on critical thinking for intelligence analysis. Mr. Moore is an instructor at the National Security Agency's Advanced Analytic Lab. As we begin this lesson, I would like to quote from the English philosopher Bertrand Russell, who in 1901 wrote in his classic Principles of Mathematics that with regard to interpreting the language of philosophic theories, the solution is the analytic method. Now, when he talks about the analytic method, he's referring to the breaking down of a language until a theory shows itself to be either a set of sensible substatements or just nonsense. His book changed the way English philosophy was conducted by establishing the analytic approach as the only reputable method of studying philosophical questions. His quote is primarily aimed at individuals who don't examine the decisions they make in their own lives and ultimately suffer the consequences for their intellectual laziness. Unfortunately, as an intelligence analyst, your mental laziness may result in consequences that are more severe than the death of your reputation. Therefore, it is imperative that you not only understand what critical thinking is, but you apply it on the job. Critical thinking is the foundation of intelligence analysis, and intelligence analysis is often the driver of everything else. With that said, here's an overview of the topics we'll discuss in this section. In Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he describes two systems at work within our thinking, which he calls System 1 and System 2. System 1 is our intuition that is developed as we learn and mature. It contains our automatic responses, mental shortcuts, and biases that allow us to do routine tasks such as riding a bike, driving a car, and making quick judgments. System 1 doesn't require a lot of mental effort and enables us to more easily function in everyday life. System 2 is the much slower and deliberate companion to System 1. We are generally forced to engage System 2 when we encounter an event or situation for the first time. Lacking a previous pattern that we can identify or associate to the new situation we encounter, we are unable to engage our fast-acting System 1 response. System 2 approaches events with a clean slate, lacking the mental shortcuts and biases that come with System 1. This allows us to approach new events more objectively, albeit more slowly and with a lot of mental effort. System 1 is generally adequate for dealing with 80 to 90% of our problems. It's the other 10 to 20%, the big problems, the one that matters most, where these normal approaches are unlikely to give us a better solution. Additionally, if we continually fail at making routine decisions, then we have to consciously disengage our System 1 response and apply System 2. As an example, if I repeatedly eat poorly and suffer from unwanted weight gain or other negative physical consequences, then this could be a time when I need to make my System 1 thinking subordinate to System 2. This could be true of any negative behavior or addiction. If we are to solve these problems from those confined to a single individual to those afflicting whole nations, we must learn how to identify and break out of restrictive mindsets and give full, serious consideration to alternative solutions. We must learn to deal with the compulsions of the human mind that by defeating objective analysis close the mind to alternatives. Failure to consider alternatives fully is the most common cause of flawed or incomplete analysis. Subordinating our System 1 way of thinking to System 2 can be easier said than done. There are lots of things we know that we should or shouldn't do, but have a difficult time applying in spite of that knowledge. To help accomplish this, we'll use some structuring techniques to help us give control to our System 2. That said, don't confuse analysis with structuring. They aren't the same thing. Structuring to analysis is what a blueprint is to building a house. Would you build a house without a blueprint? You could, of course, but there's no telling what you'd end up with. Structuring is simply a means to organize the data to enable your analysis. You must still do the analysis, the thinking, on your own. It's important to know that there is no silver bullet here. There is no one method that will solve all your analytic woes. For what structuring is to a blueprint, the techniques of structuring are to a set of carpenter's tools. You must apply the right tool to the right problem set. I plan to teach you how to use several different structuring tools to put in your analytic toolkit. So, what are the pros and cons to using structured methods to enable our analysis? First, most problems, even the ones we regard as fairly simple, are much too complex and ambiguous to analyze without some kind of structuring. Second, structuring allows us to compare and weigh one element against the other. Instead of looking at the whole problem, we break it down into its smallest elements and compare one against the other. Third, structuring helps us focus our analysis. The mind instinctively focuses whether we want it to or not. Therefore, we're better off working with it than against it. If we don't, its shortcuts can lead us down the wrong path. Fourth, structuring allows us to be systematic, thorough, and more productive of relevant ideas. We're less likely to miss something important. Fifth, by establishing a rational framework, structuring techniques allow us to impose our will on our subconscious mind and subordinate our System 1 intuition to our System 2 deliberate thinking. 6. All of the structuring methods presented in this lesson are visual. This allows us to better examine and share our ideas. Lastly, structuring allows us to apply our intuition, our internal pattern recognition ability, to alternative decisions or solutions in an organized way controlled by our conscious System 2 thinking. While structuring one's analysis is always helpful and sometimes indispensable, effective decision-making and problem-solving depends, in the end, not on how we structure our analysis, but on the soundness of our thinking, and for that we have to use our mind. A long-standing debate exists in the intelligence community about whether more should be invested in structured methodologies to improve intelligence analysis. At the heart of this controversy is the question of whether intelligence analysis should be accepted as an art, depending largely on subjective, intuitive judgment, or a science, depending largely on structured, systematic, analytic methods. Resolving this question is necessary to provide direction and determine an efficient and effective approach to improve analysis. If intelligence analysis is an art, then efforts to improve it should focus on measuring the accuracy of one's intuition, selecting those analysts with the best track record, and educating them to become experts in a given field. If, on the other hand, intelligence analysis is a science, then analysts should be trained to select the appropriate method for a given problem from a variety of scientific methodologies, and exploit it to guide them through the analytic process. The fallacy in the art or science debate may be in the either-or proposition. If intelligence analysis is not exclusively an art nor a science, then it may best be considered a combination of both intuitive and scientific methods. I've addressed the art and science debate of intelligence analysis and provide some evidence of the potential benefits of structuring in a paper I wrote that was published by the Defense Intelligence Agency. I've included this paper as a supplement to this course. Historically, these structuring methods weren't taught by different branches of the armed services, nor agencies within the intelligence community responsible for intelligence training and education. Similarly, many civilian institutions don't teach these methods either and treat these methods as esoteric, relevant only to special fields of study. However, since the publication of my paper in 1999, the study and use of structured techniques and how they can support intelligence analysis has greatly improved. One of the most comprehensive books available on the subject is Structured Analytic Techniques for Intelligence Analysis by Richard Hewer and Randolph Fearson. In spite of these techniques being more widely available in education and training, my attempts to show others how to structure their analysis are sometimes spontaneously and emphatically rejected outright. The only conclusion one can draw is that their reactions are purely intuitive, meaning they come from the subconscious mind. Why? Because structuring analysis is fundamentally at odds with the way the human mind works. Human beings are problem solvers by nature. When we arrived on the scene, every kind of human-eating predator could outrun us. Yet we managed to survive, not because of our physical attributes, but because of our newborn intellect. For that reason, we're often proud of our ability to problem solve and analyze. The fact is, however, that we mess up in our efforts much more often than we realize. The road to our many achievements is paved with our failures, because the problem-solving approach we've relied on for so long is the trial and error method. For every endeavor that succeeds, there are many more that have failed. Most of these failures result from faulty decisions based on mistaken analysis. Thus, our survival seems to rest more on our stubborn intellectual persistence than our analytic prowess. Before we go too much further into our discussion on critical thinking, we probably ought to define the term. Defining critical thinking is a first step to understanding how it contributes to intelligence analysis. Two experts, Richard Paul and Linda Elder, of the Center for Critical Thinking consider critical thinking to be that mode of thinking about any subject, content, or problem, in which the thinker improves the quality of his or her thinking by skillfully taking charge of the structures inherent in thinking and imposing intellectual standards upon them. Paul and Elder defined a set of 8 elements of reasoning that lead thinkers to ask focused questions simultaneously about the topic being considered and the thinking process itself. Paul and Elder assert that whenever people reason, they do so for a purpose. Their reasoning exists within a point of view and is shaped by both conscious and unconscious assumptions. All reasoning leads to decision points creating implications, things that might happen, and consequences, things that do happen once the decision has been made. Reasoning uses inferences based on conceptual frameworks about reality. These inferences are generated as people consider evidence necessary to answer questions or solve problems. Basing their analysis on the relevant evidence at hand, analysts contribute to the solution of threats to national security by formulating inferences about adversarial capabilities and intentions. These reports are referred to as products, and at their best offer choices to policy-making consumers and implications of those choices. These products contribute new knowledge to vital issues, allowing policymakers to critically weigh costs and outcomes to arrive at the best decisions. Finally, self-reflective questions evaluate both products and the processes that produce them. Key among the questions asked is whether they met the consumer's needs, the goal being to improve the subsequent products and their associated analysis. It is not enough to merely know the skills needed for critical thinking. To be successful, critical thinkers also need certain attitudes, dispositions, passions, and traits of mind. Actively thinking critically hones the skills. Practice yields proficiency, but in order to gain mastery, a willingness to reason in this manner becomes essential. There are a number of characteristics associated with the disposition to think critically. According to authors Richard Paul and Gerald Nosich, these traits include thinking independently, exercising fair-mindedness, developing insight into egocentricity and sociocentricity, developing intellectual humility and suspending judgment, developing intellectual courage, developing intellectual good faith and integrity, developing intellectual perseverance, developing confidence in reason, exploring thoughts underlying feelings and feelings underlying thoughts, and developing intellectual curiosity. These closely match the characteristics of successful intelligence analysts identified by Lisa Krzan and David Moore in their work on core analyst competencies. Moore and Krzan observed that successful intelligence analysts are insatiably curious, fascinated by puzzles. Their high levels of self-motivation lead analysts to observe and read voraciously and take fair-minded and varied perspectives. This helps them to make creative connections necessary for solving the hardest intelligent problems. Critical thinking is a positive influence on the intelligence analysis process. Critically thinking analysts employ what critical thinking expert Peter Fascione considers to be the core cognitive skills of critical thinking: interpretation, analysis, evaluation, inference, explanation, and self-regulation. Each of these competencies contribute to the integration of available evidence and resulting inferences into an intelligence product containing a clear line of reasoning to the most probable and likely accurate answer. Furthermore, Fascione considers that good critical thinkers can explain what they think and how they arrived at that judgment. As the analyst in question documents the reasoning process he used to arrive at his answer, he moves merely beyond stating results to justifying procedures and presenting arguments. Most importantly, he demonstrates a critical spirit, a reflection of his character as a critical thinker. A critical thinking analyst asks, how do the parts contribute to the whole? He ensures all evidence is fairly considered and that the resulting intelligence does not satisfice. When a senior policymaker, decision-maker, warfighter, or other consumer requests intelligence, they expect the intelligence analyst is a skilled critical thinker. It is implied, as these consumers need the analyst to evaluate a situation, problem, or argument and choose a path of investigation that leads to finding the best possible answers. Unfortunately, analysts' bias and mindsets often obscure best answers. From well before the Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor to the catastrophe of 9/11, a failure to think critically about potential crises contributed to numerous intelligence failures. For example, analysts cannot merely be highly knowledgeable about subjects of their analyses. Biases and mindsets too often convert confidence into arrogance. False assumptions blind them to their target's true intentions. For example, at least one CIA Iraq analyst acknowledged that the Iraqi 1990 invasion of Kuwait was an intelligence failure. We were guilty of a mindset, the idea that a country would march up to the border, put 100,000 troops there, go in and do what they've done. I don't think anybody thought they'd do it. Critical thinking can help intelligence analysts mitigate the effects of such biases and mindsets, and therefore provides a means for avoiding intelligence failures. Such avoidance involves the skillful examination of evidence, both for and against an issue, as well as consideration of obvious and the less obvious alternative explanations. In the Iraq invasion of Kuwait example, critically thinking analysts would have considered other possible explanations for why Hussein's troops were on the Kuwaiti border and what he intended to do with them. Analysts have to learn and be encouraged to think in this manner. Modern strategic intelligence pioneer Sherman Kent was aware of this when he wrote 50 years ago that intelligence analysts are supposed to have had more training in the techniques of guarding against their own intellectual frailties than the larger populace. Critical thinking is one means to deflect these failures by positively influencing the entire process of intelligence production. Congratulations on finishing the lecture on critical thinking. We'll apply these concepts throughout the course, so be sure to brush up on them as needed. I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture on logical, probable, and plausible reasoning.